We're live. Sweet. So it is August 12th, 2024, and we're doing the live lesson here on lead belaying, really. There should be an ing at the end of that. But we're going to talk about lead belaying, which is the act of managing the rope for the climber who is leading up a route. Now, for those of you who don't know what leading up a route is, lead climbing is when someone is climbing up and they're clipping the rope in as they go up. So in sport climbing, they'll place a quick draw and then they will clip the rope in as they go. So it's different than top rope belaying, which is where the rope is already going through the anchor at the top. They're actually bringing the rope up with them. So what makes that different is that you need to feed rope out as they go up, and you also need to take rope in at times. So it's definitely a little bit more dynamic. The agenda, basically, we're going to talk a little bit about the devices for a moment, the different devices that you can use for this, and then we're also going to talk about the different techniques. So there's a lot to cover here, and I'm going to start basically from the ground and work our way up as far as like the order of events and what I typically teach when I'm teaching people how to do this. So the first thing is the devices that we're using. I actually don't have my gree here with me, but I do have this, which is a tube style device. This specific one is an ATC, and you can see here, it does not have any mechanisms in it. This is a fixed piece of metal. This is, I believe it's a wire just wrapped in some plastic. You'll see multiple different types of these. I don't know if I have. This is a tube style device as well, but it has no guide loop, is what they call this loop. The guide loop just allows you to belay from the top, but lots of different types and formats. They all do the same thing. They're basically just adding bends into the rope. Any belay device is basically just adding friction or adding some kind of gripping property to the rope. So for this one specifically, you would pinch a piece of the rope and squeeze it into one of these holes. Boom. And then you clip the belay device through both the rope and this black thing. And then if the climber falls, you would have your hand down here, and all of those bends in the rope allow it to add more friction. So rather than your hand having to hold on to everything, those bends, the friction gets distributed through the device and then to your harness. That's a tube style device. The gree, which is very common, used in gyms mostly, and honestly, like that's what I sport climb with for the most part. That has an auto camming device, so it actually grips the rope a lot stronger than these can in general. And they call it an assisted braking because you can't trust it fully, but in almost every situation, the gree is going to automatically grip onto the rope, making the dependence on the hand a lot less. So those are two devices. If you're just learning, generally the community kind of agrees on this. If you learn on a gree, then you get a bit more complacent or like casual with your hand because it assists the braking and it pretty much auto brakes. You can get a little bit too relaxed on that. And then when you switch over to a tube style device, it doesn't have that assisted braking. So if you're used to having a device that assists you with the braking and then you switch to tube style, you can drop your partner because you're so used to your muscle memory doesn't make you realize that you have to grip as strong. So that's the problem with starting with a gree. Most people do these days, though, at least in North America, from where I've been climbing and people I talk to. The reason why people use the tube style device, this is the common device you would use to rappel. Grees aren't as common to rappel, though they are used for that. You can just only rappel on a single strand. Grees are also heavier. So when you're doing big, like, depending on the climb, if you're doing big climbs, a lot of people like to just bring the tube style because they have to rappel and ascend. And rather than bring a rappel device and a gree, they can just bring a tube style device. But it's definitely dependent on what you're doing. tube style devices are also cheaper. So if budget's a big consideration, then that's a part of it. So those are the two devices. That one specifically is called an ATC. That's just the brand name. There's Reverso. There's like a bunch of different ones. They all do similar things. Some people also belay with just a munter hitch, and a munter hitch is just it's a certain way to hitch the rope around a carabiner. It looks like this, and it does the same thing that a tube style device does. It just adds bends into the rope so that when they fall, it kind of distributes the weight into the carabiner. That's pretty uncommon, although I did meet someone from Germany who said that in certain parts of Germany, they actually regularly belay with a munter hitch. So I just wanted to say that that's another way to do it. And then finally, there are these things. They're like, I don't even know what they're called. I think they're just called eight devices. I don't even know, but they're basically just a fixed piece of metal. It's kind of old school. I've only seen like older people use them or canyoneers use them, but it's basically think of an 8 with one hole bigger than the other hole, and they feed the rope through that in a certain way. So it adds friction into that figure 8. And then they distribute that into the harness that your hand doesn't have to grip as tightly. So those are the devices. Now we're going to get into actually belaying. So the first step in this, and this is actually, I'm going to share my screen here because I have a video from me climbing last week or 2 weeks ago that shows this really well. Okay, so this is what I do, and I'm using a gree in this situation, but this is what I do when I'm setting up for a climb. So first thing I do, and this is actually a habit I didn't have at first, is I'll keep my gree clipped to my belay loop. You can see for just a split second there. My gree is already clipped into my belay loop, and I open up the plate, and then I clip it back into the gree. If you don't understand that, that's okay. But if you've already been using a gree, this is a good trick that you can do. And the reason I do this is because when I'm on multi-pitches, it makes it less likely that I will drop the gree. Okay. So in this scenario, we had stick clipped the first quick draw. So it is already going up there. And now I'm going to place the rope into the gree. Importantly, on the gree, there is a direction that the rope has to go. So you can see here, there's one rope, one side that's going closer to the climber. So that side is closer to the climber and this side isn't. If you look at the actual gree itself, you will see on a gree, there's little images, and you need to make sure that you place the climber side closer to the climber and the brake strand close to the brake strand, obviously. But you can see the little picture there. Brake strand, climber side. Boom. Okay. So now we're back to this. Okay. So first thing I do is I clip it in the correct way. In this case, if it's already clipped through a quick draw, I'm going to take in all the slack. If it wasn't already clipped into the quick draw, then I'm going to just leave enough rope for him to get to the quick draw. Now we're chatting a little bit. And the next thing I do is you can see I'm checking his knot. So I'm going to visually check his knot. I'm going to think his knot's good. Boom. See, I pointed at it. I was like, how's your knot? He does the figure 8 where you put the brake strand back through. Makes it easier to untie. But I just visually inspect that his knot is on correctly. If you're climbing with a newer climber, you definitely want to make sure they set up their harness correct as well. So their strands are double back through. And then I'm showing him and checking myself as well. So I'm checking the rope is going through the correct way. And then I'm also showing him that it's locked. And I just do that by tapping on it while he's looking. I think this is a great habit to have. Me and Peter have been climbing together for like six years probably, maybe even more. But we still do this check every time before we start climbing. Now he's started climbing here, and what I did was I realized that my rope was in a bad place for him to move past it. So this is a really important thing with lead belaying that isn't necessarily the case when you're top rope belaying, is that you need to be dynamic when you're moving. So if you're moving around, or the climber has the rope in their way, then you need to make sure that you move the rope out of their way. So that's what I was doing here. I'm just getting out of his way so he can continue climbing past it. And then same thing when he moved past. Now I was moving into an even different spot. So I'm always looking up. And if you're wondering what's going on with my eyes here, I have these belay glasses on, and that just allows me to look up without hanging my head back as much because it was an overhang route. But the reason I chose that clip is so you can see it was dynamic. And you see the rope here is always a little bit, there's a little bit of slack in the rope. So it's not tight like a top rope belay. If you're top rope belaying, you basically keep it quite snug the whole time. But because he's moving up the whole time, if I had this snug and he tried to move up, then it wouldn't allow him to move up. So you can see it's quite loose, but importantly, I always have a hand on the brake strand. He's moving up. I'm watching him. And then when he needs slack, so this is him underneath a bolt. I'll switch back to myself for a second here. Where am I? Okay. Whoa. So what he's doing there is he is tied in. Right? Just imagine I'm tied in here. So Peter is tied in, and he's clipped a bolt above him. And now he's reaching down to grab more. I'll zoom this back. So he clips above him, and he's reaching down to grab more rope to clip it. But because the rope is going above his waist, when I pull this up and clip it, if you think about the total amount of rope that needs to be in the system now, it's actually this much and this much. So think about how much rope there is here, and then everything above my waist. How much rope is above my waist? There's all of this rope, right? It's a ton of rope that has just been added to the system that I need to dump out so that he can clip that comfortably. So if we go back to the video now, you'll understand why I needed to so quickly give out so much rope, right? Boom, jump over. And then, oh, actually, I don't know if, yeah, this is screen sharing. And I see he's clipping. Boom, I'm dumping out 2 big armfuls of rope. Now with a gree, the way that you have to do this, and I don't know if you can see this very well. I'll have to make another video later on for it. But to give out slack really quickly, I have to place my thumb to deactivate the brake. On a ATC, you don't have to do this as much at all. But on the gree, I quickly put my thumb there. You can see I still have my hand over the rope, but I put my thumb there so I can quickly dump out rope. And the second that I'm done dumping out rope, I take my thumb off of that cam. That way I'm not stopping the cam anymore. And once he clips that, I'll take in the rope. But you can see, oh yeah, I think this is the bit where he falls. This is kind of the amount of rope that I keep out all the time. That way, if he does a big move or if he like moves his foot and it pulls on the rope, I'm not short roping him. So short roping him would be when I don't have enough rope out and he gets pulled back down. And people fall all the time because of short roping. So a little bit of extra rope there allows him to have movement upwards without being pulled down by the rope. Forget exactly when, but so I'm just slowly managing it as he climbs. There we go again, dumping out a bunch of rope, take my thumb off right away. And you see I had to do like 3 full arm pulls. And then once they clip above them, you can take in all that rope. In this case, he wanted to take. So I just took in all the rope. Boom. Okay, so you can't hear it here, but what happened here is I had all the rope in, he was hanging on it, and he was getting set up to climb. And this is an important thing when you're communicating with your climber. Generally, one of the things that's said after they fall, they're going to get ready to get climbing again, and then he's going to yell climbing. And at that point, when he says climbing, my job is to make sure that I'm not pulling on the rope anymore. So I have to quickly get the weight off of the rope. So you can see I was hanging back so far here. And now what I'm going to do next is there's two ways that you can do this. You could just dump out rope from this, like put your thumb on it, or if you step closer to the wall or step on something higher, that will also provide slack. So in this case, I do both. I step up here. Actually, I just step up. And just by me moving my body a few feet up, that gave him enough slack. I look up. All right, Peter's good. I even gave him a little bit more. And then as he climbed up, I step back down. So he still has slack to maneuver, but I'm, rather than just feeding rope and pulling it back in, I'm being dynamic. And you can see in that just 5 seconds between this, I stand up, I look up, okay, rope's on him, he's going up, and then I step down. Super dynamic, and I'm managing the amount of rope in the system. Now here, Peter's about to fall. I think this is the section. So you can see my hand. My thumb isn't actually on the brake strand here. It's just right beside it. So there's like a little lip you can hang your finger in. But Peter's about to fall here. What I'm doing is I'm crouching down a little bit. So you can see my knees are bent. I'm in a pretty stable position, and I'm ready to do a little hop. Because what happens is if especially if you're heavier than a partner, if you're just sitting on the rope and they fall, it's going to whip them into the wall. So you want to kind of spread it out and be like a bungee jump rather than them falling on a cable. So I'm going to jump, and you can see, I don't know if I can adjust the playback speed. There we go, 0.5. You can see what I do here is as he's falling, I bend my knees and I jump, boop. And he weighs more than me, so it was definitely, he sucked me up. And then as he was climbing back up, I was able to come back down. And then he had a soft fall, so he wasn't getting slammed into the rock, and he wasn't, hurting his feet. The caveat to that technique, the jumping technique here, is that you don't want to do this if they're close to the ground or they're close to a ledge. And the reason for that is because if they fall too far, they're going to smash their feet on the ledge. So you have to make a decision. In this case, it was vertical or overhung, so it's fine. And then as he climbs up, more rope comes back down to me. And what I'm doing here is I'm jumping and pulling rope in as he's hauling up the rope. So he's grabbing on the rope and pulling on it, and I'm taking in all the slack. That way he can get higher up on the rope. That's what's happening here. It's kind of taxing, especially on the climber, but if you get the timing right and he's pulling at the same time your weight is bouncing on the rope, you can actually save them a lot of heartache, which is nice. Looks silly looking back at it, but that's just how it goes. Then they come down. You can see here, at least on a gree, you always want to have your hands on the brake strand. On a tube style device, you'd have both hands on the brake strand, just letting it slide through. Gree, you're managing the speed with the lever. Importantly, I always teach this when I'm teaching because it's important. You're managing the speed with your hand on the lever, not your hand on the brake strand. And that's important because if you see they're going too fast, you can just let go of this lever and it'll slow them down. If you're cranking on the lever and then using this hand to manage the speed, it's easier to get out of control. So you're managing the speed with the lever when you're lowering. This is definitely lead belaying in general, is something that you should learn ideally from an experienced partner. This is just meant to be supplemental or reminder information. But I lower them down. You want to especially go slow when they're getting close to the ground. You can go pretty fast to the ground, but that last 5 feet or so, keep it slow so they don't smash their feet. You can see here it's quite rocky and jagged, so they can definitely lose their footing easily and hurt themselves. So you want to make sure it's slow when they're getting down there. And then you always dap them up. Say good job. That is lead belaying. And yeah, there's definitely more that we can get into on that. if you weigh a lot less than your partner or vice versa, there are these devices. Man, I forget what they're called because I've never actually had to use them. But there's a device that you would clip as the first quick draw, and it basically adds friction so that when the heavy person falls, it doesn't whip the light person up like a cartoon. Yeah, I'll make a separate video on that. But if you have big weight differences, you have to have some more considerations. And then the ledge thing I was mentioning in that video was just obviously, like, if this is the climb, if this is the anchor, and these are all the bolts on the way up, and this is the ground. If your climber is here, and the rope's going from you through a quick draw and then to them, if they fall close to the ground, there's a chance that they might hit the ground. So you have to make sure ideally you're managing the rope in the system enough that they don't hit the ground. But then the other thing is, even if they're really high up, if they just got over a ledge and they're right here, it's almost like the ground, there's another ground here. So you have to consider that, right? So when you're thinking about giving a super soft catch, you have to consider that if there's a ledge there and your super soft catch is going to make them smash into the ledge, you always have to be aware of that. The other thing that belayers kind of jobs is that you have to be watch being second eyes for your climber. So if they back clip, if you don't know what these words are, that's fine. But if they back clip or Z clip, or their foot is behind the rope, you want to be really careful to be watching out for that so you can notify them. Be like, hey, you back clip there, or hey, you clipped this wrong. Or like, if you see anything wrong, obviously don't be yelling and scaring your climber because you're safe. If they have something wrong, like, calmly tell them, but let them know immediately if they do something that you think is really unsafe. And that way you just have two eyes. Because sometimes when you're climbing, you're in the zone, you think you clipped right, but you accidentally back clipped, or you Z clipped accidentally, or you're going off route, whatever. Like, you're just in the zone. So the belayer might be a little more calm and maybe just be able to see things you can't. So being a observant belayer is always nice for the climber. And the final thing on this, just to mitigate for things that have had, like, people have died because of this thing that I'm about to talk about, is belayers take the climber off belay when they get to the anchor. So generally when someone climbs up to the top, they will set up an anchor and the belayer will lower them down. There's definitely scenarios where they'll get belayed up to the next climber. In a multi-pitch scenario, usually they set up an anchor, yell secure, and then they come up to them. Sometimes they rappel off, sometimes they walk off, whatever. But in general, people generally in like single pitch sport climbing will climb up, set up an anchor, and then get lowered off. So if you are doing anything like the top belay, walk off, multi-pitch scenario, then the belayer is going to take them off belay entirely, like take off the tube style device, take off the gree entirely. And you want to be really careful whenever you do that, because people have miscommunicated before the climber leaves the ground, and then taking the climber off belay, the climber leans back and they fall all the way to the ground and really hurt themselves or die. So you want to make sure that you're communicating, especially when you're newer to climbing and maybe your partner's new as well. Like, have a conversation about what's going to happen when they get to the anchor. Okay. There's a lot of communication that goes into this. Generally, you want to be really clear and concise about your communication, especially if they're going, like, sometimes the ledge is bigger than this, or there's a corner and the climber will climb around that, and then it makes communication really hard. Sometimes it's loud. I've climbed beside roads, oceans, when it's windy out, it starts raining and they're out of sight. So you want to kind of know what the next steps are and how to be safe, even if you kind of lose communication. In multi-pitching, or places where you're really far away from each other. Sometimes people even bring radios, not generally for single pitch climbing, but the point is to be really concise with your communication, be on the same page with your climber about what's going to happen when they get to the top. So that's just a quick 25-minute little video on lead belaying. There's a lot more that goes into this. I just wanted to give you a little fundamental, like, here's the basics. This is, the basics of it all. And then we can build off this knowledge. Or if you already know all this stuff, hopefully it's just a quick reminder. And that's all. Peace.